Let's go and move with life. Let it go. Something new tonight. Let's go and move with life. Let it go. Something new tonight.
G'day guys, welcome to the Unofficial Scorecard Podcast, a podcast where we talk all things boxing and occasionally the wider world of combat sports. This is episode 64, and guys, today, man, we have a big one. I still can't kind of believe it, but I was so lucky to be joined by legendary boxing broadcaster, known globally, all over the world, a man that needs no introduction, Al Bernstein. Guys, this was truly an absolute thrill. I never thought a podcast like this would happen. I've been lucky enough to have a couple of these type of pods before to spend some time and have a chat with some people that I never even imagined I'd be lucky enough, fortunate enough to be able to talk to. But wow, it happened. To steal a line from another very famous boxing broadcaster, it happened. Al was absolutely brilliant. What did we talk about? Well, what didn't we talk about is probably the easier question. Of course, we got into Al's most recent writing. He's started writing again for the Ring magazine, so we had a chat about that. A chat about the current heavyweight division and this era sort of coming to a crescendo, and his thoughts being ringside and seeing many of the fights up close and personal. Al just put such a great bow tie on things. You guys are very familiar with Al. You know how eloquent he is and how much of a professional he is, and the way he can sum things up just in a sentence or two where it would take me about 15 and I'd just be rambling. You know, Al puts a bow on it like no one else can. We also had a chat about how Al initially got his foot in the door in the boxing industry, and then sort of how he started to become a commentator, which I didn't know any of these anecdotes before. I hadn't heard them or read them before, so it was ultra fascinating. Also wanted to talk about his particular commentary style, which I imagine you guys are probably very much of the same mind as me. He's a brilliant commentator, and we really sort of delved into that. Al shares a really personal story which helped form his commentary technique throughout the last 40 plus years that he's been doing it. So we went pretty hard on the commentary stuff, guys, but I was just completely fascinated about it. What I didn't expect is to hear Al's pretty wild recollection of his one experience on the Triller PPV with Snoop Dogg and rappers, and man, it was crazy. So Al breaks that down in great detail for us as well. We will talk about Al's induction into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. What a monumentous achievement, the highest honour you can possibly receive in the boxing industry, and Al was inducted in 2012, so I had to ask him about that. And of course we had to discuss the Aussies in action at the end of March, Liam Wilson, Michael Zraffa and Tim Tszyu over in America. Guys, there was much more in this as well, but look, Al Bernstein's on the pod. The last thing you want to be listening to is me doing a 5-minute intro, so let's get to that now. Alright, well here I am joined by long-time boxing broadcaster, boxing writer, 2012 International Boxing Hall of Fame inductee, one of the best boxing commentators to ever do it. It's Al Bernstein. Al, thanks for carving out some time in your day to have a chat with me, mate.
Very happy to be doing this with you. This is it's fun.
Well, I couldn't sleep last night. I was so excited. So,
well, I'm glad. I hope I live up to your expectations.
Oh, absolutely. You already have. So we're off to a good start. But I just wanted to start, Al. You've in the time since Showtime's unfortunate finishing up in the time of boxing, you've started to sort of spread your wings and get back into the writing side a little bit. You crafted a great article for the Ring recently about the sort of state of the heavyweight division. Made a great analogy and compared it to the Academy Awards with sort of different categories, which we'll get into that a little bit more specifically. But when I was sort of reading the article and thinking about, sort of processing what you were writing and how you were sort of summing up this recent heavyweight era, it occurred to me that for so much of that, you had a perfect ringside seat. You were right at the forefront of this era. How? I guess you did a great job in the article of explaining that, but now we can sort of delve on it a little deeper in a chat format. How special was this era to you sort of personally in the last sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 years?
This part of the heavyweight equation, remember the heavyweight division for a long time felt kind of, even though there was always a big fighter at the top, like Vladimir Klitschko, for a long time, for other parts of the world, not necessarily Europe, the heavyweight division didn't feel as robust, right, as it could have. And then that all started to kind of change with the Wilder, Fury, Joshua kind of trio creating excitement in the heavyweight division. Some other people that I alluded to when I did that article just below them. And all of a sudden, interesting and good heavyweight matches were happening. And several of the top heavyweights had fueled enthusiasm, not just in Europe, but all around the world, right? And that started to make it a pretty interesting time in the heavyweight division. And as we've gone through it, we've had classic fights like the three that, Fury and Wilder had. Two of them especially were astonishing. The first one, which I broadcast with the draw where Tyson Fury rose like Lazarus from the dead after he was knocked down. I said in that article that I wrote for Ring, it remains one of the more extraordinary things I've witnessed in 43 years of broadcasting. The idea that he got up and not just got up, finished the round and won the last part of the round. So their trilogy, Anthony Joshua, I went and did his fight when he fought Vladimir Klitschko, and I did another one of his fights in Wembley Stadium with 90,000 people. Then there was the upset to Andy Ruiz, the coming back from that. Then we had those three as a cornerstone. Then all of a sudden, Alexander Usyk jumps into the picture. We of course knew he was one of the great on the Mount Rushmore of cruiserweights, along with for sure Evander Holyfield. And he did the impossible, didn't he? He moved up. He beat Joshua. He beat him again. He got to be, undisputed, which is staggering. Or he got on his way trying to become undisputed. Let me put it that way. So he added another texture to that division. I think this part of the heavyweight division, which I pointed out, we're on the back end of now, still more to go in the next year and a half, 2 years, but we're on the back side of it. This little era in the heavyweight division, I think, is going to be one that people remember with some fond and interesting memories.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, you can't help how old you are. So I sort of missed the whole 90s heavyweight era. I sort of got hooked on boxing with Kosciuszko and Zab Judah was the first fight I ever saw live at the time it was happening, 2001. So, but I hear of people sort of that 5-10 years older than me talk about the 90s heavyweight era with just like such reverence and such, it's such an amazing highlight of their boxing fandom, I guess. So it's been great the last couple of years to be able to get a little bit of a taste of that for myself in sort of a time when I'm following the sport. So, let
me interject, and then I'm not to interrupt you, but I'm going to say this because it speaks to what you're saying. I've covered many, many great heavyweight fights from 1980 to now. I sat there as a fan, interestingly enough, for the third Tyson Fury Wilder fight. I went to the fight as a fan, sat in seats. I didn't even sit in the press area. I will tell you, that is one of the top 3 exciting heavyweight fights that I've ever seen. So This era produced something that, in my opinion, just that alone was extraordinary. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to make that point that you're correct in saying that something special actually happened here.
Yeah, no. Thank you for sharing that, Al. Wow, that's high praise. So, well, we really are in a bit of a special era. That's fantastic. And you mentioned that it's sort of coming to that crescendo now. But I loved your article and the way you framed it, because you also gave a fair bit of time to, as you put it, the supporting actors sort of coming up behind. So the future still looks bright. But a little bit more widely and more specifically to you, Al, we know you've got another article with the Ring coming relatively soon. soon. Is this something we can expect a little bit more from you in the coming future? A little bit more writing, spreading your wings, sort of getting back into the writing thing?
Yeah, it's funny. I probably will. I wrote a book, of course, about 10, 12 years ago, and I enjoyed writing. I started out as a writer. I was a newspaper editor in Chicago.
Oh.
Yeah, and for the first 10 years of my professional life, in my 20s and until I was about 30 years old, I was a newspaper writer and then editor. And that was, I thought, for the most part, going to be a lot of what I did as an adult. And ironically, it was not in sports. I wanted to be in sports, but it was in hard news. I got a job. For some reason, I couldn't get a job writing sports in Chicago. I don't know why. I couldn't. So I became I moved up as a community newspaper writer and then editor. And I won an award for investigative journalism. So I kept getting pushed ahead in hard news, and I didn't want to be in it, right? So, which was weird. But that was my beginning, and I've always written all these years, but sometimes I haven't had the opportunity or like the time really to kind of devote to writing things like these ring articles. And now, it's funny. I've had a little time from our last Showtime broadcast, and I'm going to be broadcasting again shortly. But I had some time, and I said, you know what? I'm just feeling like I want to express myself as a writer more again, and I'm going to be continuing doing these articles for Ring. In fact, I just talked to somebody this morning about doing something a syndicated thing in radio, and for whatever reason, and I've always, I think about the fact that I do music shows here in Las Vegas, and I'm pretty eclectic in the way I approach multi-dimensionally what I try and do, but I think now it's going to be even more so. I will be getting back to doing broadcasting, but so the writing was part of that. It's probably a longer answer than you needed, but I am going to do a little bit more of it as we continue on.
Excellent, that's great to hear, and we'll take your thoughts on any medium we can get, Mel. So that's
I appreciate that.
That's fantastic news. But so I didn't know you started in hard news or as a newspaper editor.
That was my beginning.
Yeah, unbelievable. So funnily enough, everyone's beginning in the boxing industry that I've spoken to over the last couple of years doing this podcast, it's always different. There's no sort of one standard kind of way in I've noticed. And it's not like you can just finish high school and go to college and do a boxing commentator 101 course and then you walk out the other end and get a job at HBO or Showtime or something like that. Yeah. So how did you make the transition from the newspaper side of things and actually first get your foot in the door in the boxing industry, I guess?
Yeah, it was a kind of, I came in kind of through the side door of everything. So I was doing the newspaper, and I started freelancing for sports publications. Like I would write for the Washington Post, a newspaper in Washington, D.C., covering things in the Midwest. I covered the Chicago Bears, the football team, and all the rest of it, and other things. And then I started writing and I've been an amateur boxer, and I wrote this book called it was a book. It was called Boxing for Beginners, and it was with a company that was part instructional and whatever, in which I interviewed a bunch of people. And then when I wrote that book, I started writing for Ring Magazine and Boxing Illustrated and a bunch of the boxing magazines. And then when ESPN was just starting its boxing show, Top Rank Boxing, one of their stops was in Chicago. And I had just done a little TV work in Chicago. I hosted this show briefly, and of course I was covering boxing. And when they came to Chicago, they were very small in their embryonic stages, not like the ESPN we know today. and we didn't even get ESPN in Chicago, so nobody even saw it, but I knew what they were. I connected with them, and I said, look, you're coming here to Chicago. I know the Chicago fighters. I know the Chicago scene. I will be happy to help you guys. You don't even have to pay me. I will just be happy to help you and help with your broadcast because I want to get involved in broadcasting and boxing broadcasting, which speaks to your point about, there's not a single way to do it. They accepted my generous offer to work for free. and then on one of the shows, Tommy Hearns was sitting in as a broadcaster with Sam Rosen, and he was struggling a little bit. And I was there, and they had interviewed me the show before and kind of gotten me on the air and to talk about things. And the producer said, get Al and have Al sit at ringside. So I came to ringside that night and did some commentary with them. And they liked it. And from that moment on, I did ESPN.
Wow.
So it was crazy. And that's why I always say to young people when they are asking me for, suggestions and things, I always say, get your foot in the door. It may not be a lot of money. It may be no money. It may be whatever. Get your foot in the door and get experience. And I was in the right place at the right time. And I made it happen because I found out when they were coming. You have to be diligent. But so that was that. And then they started using me on all their shows. And this will show you in ESPN back in those days. They didn't want to spend money. Like I lived in Chicago. So they had shows in the East Coast, and then they had shows in Chicago and Las Vegas. So they had Randy Gordon doing all the shows in the East Coast, and I would do the shows in Chicago and also started doing some in Las Vegas. And we went on that way for a year or two, and then Randy left and went over to USA Fights or whatever. And then I got all the fights on ESPN, the old Top Rank Boxing Series, which we were doing about 45 shows a year. It was amazing. And that was it.
Wow. And you mentioned there that your sort of initial goal was to get into broadcasting, which is a bit more of a sort of more of a general, broader term. Was the actual sort of ringside commentating that you kind of just got thrust into unexpectedly, was that a goal, or was that just something that presented itself and you rolled with it?
Not exactly. To be honest, I didn't imagine that was going to be something I was going to be able to do. As I said, I had boxed, I covered boxing, but I didn't see that as the thing that was going to propel me. If anything, I thought I would be either interviewing or doing features or doing whatever. That was not the thing. And it's funny you're asking me that because I don't get asked that specific question very often. I didn't think that was going to be the thing. But once I sat down and I was doing it, I felt like this was something I could do. And I felt, to be honest with you, and it's a kind of, even though obviously I'm known now and I've been doing it for many years, I took the approach that, look, the people are seeing me. They don't know who I am. They have no reason to think I have any special insight to tell them. So when I sit down here, I can't just sit here and pretend and analyze the fight and give them my opinions. I have to bring something else here to ringside. Information, anecdotes, whatever. I have to treat it like, yes, I have to analyze this fight for better or for worse. I have to do some of that because that's what I'm here to do. But I better bring something else because they don't know who I am. I have to earn their credibility, my credibility, and earn their respect. And in those early years, that was my approach. And I've tried to never change that, so that even today, though people know me and hopefully they think I know what I'm watching when I see a boxing match, I still don't feel that I have the right, and I don't think any broadcaster does, to sit there and get by just looking at a boxing event and saying and analyzing, which is a part of it. I have to bring something else to the table. And that was the way I approached those first couple of years when I was broadcasting.
Wow. Well, it's funny you say that, Al, because I was going to say the thing that, and I'm only speaking for myself clearly, but I'm pretty sure anyone listening and any boxing fan around the world would have a very similar opinion. The thing that really stands out to me about your commentary is, we've seen guys come and go and all over the world in different markets and different channels and different broadcasters that are very critique heavy and seem to not treat the fighters with the respect that they deserve, even if they are making mistakes. But with you, that is never an issue. We never get the feeling that you always hold the fighters and the sport itself in such like a high level of reverence, and that just bleeds through the screen no matter where you're watching it from on the planet. I think that's a unique ability that you have to bring to the telecast that a lot of other guys don't. And was that sort of a deliberate kind of tactic of yours in the beginning, or is that just naturally sort of come out of you when the red light goes on?
A little bit of both. I'll tell you a story. I wrote it in my book, and I'll tell the brief version here now. When I was about 10 years old, my father and I were watching a baseball game. Right, I was a big Chicago Cubs fan, and I know even the folks down in Australia know that probably that the Chicago Cubs baseball team didn't win a World Series for 100 years. They never won. And so when the Cubs did anything good, it was exceptional. We were Cubs fans. I was sitting there with my dad watching the game, and a relief pitcher for the Cincinnati Reds did poorly. The Cubs got a rally, and I was all excited. And when the relief pitcher was being taken out of the game and going to the dugout, I was like, yeah, go back to the minors, kid. I was like being kind of mean-spirited to this guy, right? And all of a sudden, the TV turns off. I'm like, what happened? My father turned the TV off. And I said, what happened? He said, just because the Cubs are doing well doesn't mean you should yell at that guy and be mean to him. He said, that guy's a major leaguer and he's doing something special and he's having a bad day. He said, how would you like it if people did that to you when you had a bad day? And he said, if you're going to keep doing that, we're not going to watch baseball together. Now, my dad was a very gentle, kind man who hardly ever even chastised me, right? So this made a huge impression on me. And I never did that again. Well, and my dad, unfortunately, I was about 10, he passed away 2 years later. Oh. And the only reason I mention that is because we didn't get to watch as much sports TV. I used to watch the boxing matches with him and whatever, as much as I would have liked to, right? And what he did that day made a huge impression on me. And it made me realize that there is no reason to be mean-spirited and no reason to demean athletes because they've failed at doing something. And so that kind of stayed with me forever. And so as a broadcaster, I think your obligation is to be fair to the people that you're covering. Of course, you can comment when you think they may have some fighter who is switching stances constantly in a fight, and maybe it doesn't serve him well. And you feel obligated to say, look, he's not performing as well as a lefty. He should stay righty, or I think he should stay righty. You want to make sure you say that in a way that is not personal to that fighter or doesn't demean him. It's simply a strategy. And so, yes, it is part of my ethos that I don't want to be critical. It sickens me when I see sportscasters go over the line. And we see it a lot, don't we?
Yeah.
I'm sure it's true worldwide. It's, I've in all the years of, seeing it, some do it and I just don't like it.
Yeah. Wow. What an important lesson from your father. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
and
Yeah.
I'm not over dramatizing. It made a huge impression on me, and I think, and I think part of that is over the years, 43 years of boxing, I have had very few harsh words from boxers or with boxers. Once in a blue moon, somebody would be distressed. Maybe for
Adrian
either.
Broner, like what was up with that guy?
Yeah,
That's
I
weird.
mean, Broner, yeah. Well, my pal Adrian Broner, yeah. He'd be the ultimate. But very few that, I mean, and I think part of what made that whole incident even more shocking and surprising was it's not the way things normally go with me. So that made it even more. My buddy Adrian Broner.
Yeah. Unbelievable. But yeah, Al, well, we love the way you commentate, and as you alluded to earlier, it seems to be in your future somewhere, some way, at some point in time, which is great news for the fans. But I just wanted to ask you another question about your commentating style specifically. Funnily enough, like back in the day, I mentioned that I sort of got involved with the sport with the sort of later end of Kostya's career. Funnily enough, his last ever win, a great performance, a rematch with Shamba Mitchell. You commentated it with Steve Albert.
Which fight? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
The Shamba Mitchell rematch.
Oh, yeah, Shamba Mitchell, yeah.
You commentated with Steve Albert, another iconic voice. Back in those days, we didn't get the actual Showtime broadcast in Australia. We got the international feed. But I think it was about 12 years ago or so, someone put up on YouTube, Adam Ould, who puts up a lot of Australian fights, put up the full 49-minute Showtime broadcast. And I've watched it dozens of times. I love that fight. But it was great to be able to see you and Steve working together in the pre-fight, the post-fight, the whole Showtime production of the time. I have to say, and this is genuine, for me, it's the best top-to-bottom boxing broadcast I've ever seen. Like, you and Steve Albert were just absolutely...
Steve's great. Steve was phenomenal, yeah.
Like, you guys were just absolutely at the top of your game. And again, as I was when I was reading your Ring article about the heavyweight era recently, I rewatched this fight a couple of weeks ago and the whole broadcast. And it occurred to me as well, you've worked with so many different, not only on-air partners, but you've worked in different countries. You've done stuff in the UK with, I think, Channel 5, was it? You did the first show with Triller, which would have been one hell of an experience.
That was intriguing, yes.
Do you have a particular approach when you're working with new on-air talent and also like different broadcast teams? Because, again, just from the outside looking in, but you just seem to fit in so seamlessly with whatever dynamic you sort of put in front of. Do you just sort of improvise that on the spot, or is there a lot of effort that we don't know about?
That's a very good question. When at ESPN in the early days, when I started out working with Sal Marciano, he left after a year and a half. And during that period, before I got with Barry Tompkins, who, of course, was a great broadcaster, we did about 7 years together. I joked in my book that during that period of time, I worked with almost everybody that ever passed through Bristol, Connecticut. I worked with so many different people. I did play-by-play. I did color. There was one year when I did play-by-play. I was doing play-by-play when we in Atlantic City, and Dave Bontempo was doing color. And then the next week, I'm in California doing color, and Tom Kelly's doing play-by-play. So not only was I switching partners, I was switching roles, which is crazy. All those years, I worked with dozens and dozens of people. That was a big help to me because not everyone's created equal. Some people better than others, but more importantly, everybody's different. So it gave me a chance to kind of react to people doing different things and different cadences and all the rest of it. I think part of the reason I've been able to fit in and I've always been kind of a chameleon, able to just change with situations. And I think part of the reason I was able to do it is because I worked with so many people, and I'm also true to what I do. What I'm going to do isn't really going to change that much. And I'll give you a perfect example. It might change around the edges because of where I'm at. So here's two examples, and you brought them up. when I went to do the fights in England, right? I did about 5 years on Channel 5 in England. I was actually the first U.S. commentator to be hired by a British broadcasting company. Yeah, which was interesting. And I took that responsibility seriously. And of course, I was keenly aware that it's a different place. References that I might make to American audiences have no meaning to the British audience, right? So I deliberately started to filter out things that were of that sort. Then the other thing I did is I watched a lot of British shows, and noticed, among other things, that with their commentary, the play-by-play commentator in Great Britain functions a little bit differently in some ways than Americans were at that time. And I worked with a really good guy, Dave Farrar, who's terrific. And I wanted to fit my commentary so that I wanted to bring what I brought, and they wanted me to bring what I brought to it. They didn't want me to pretend to be, I certainly wasn't going to pretend to be British or whatever, but I wanted to make sure that I gave them what, to some extent, I fit into the mode of what they wanted. And I certainly took out all references to pop culture in America or whatever, to an extent. And I also vowed I wasn't going to try and throw in things that made me that I was trying to pretend to them that I was really a closet Brit, right? Even though I love Great Britain. So I did. I was aware of that. So I still did exactly what I always do, but I just made sure that I was conforming. You mentioned the Triller thing. That was fascinating because that was an insane show on every level. I mean, and there was only one of them, right? There was two. I was supposed to do the Tyson, Roy Jones exhibition thing that Triller did first. I caught COVID. I was supposed to do the play-by-play on that. Mauro Ronaldo filled in for me. But then for when they had their next Triller thing, I was there along with a million broadcasters. If you saw the show.
I did.
Did you see the show?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. It was performance art, right? It was
something.
Yeah, it was something. I mean, everybody was getting high during the show, drinking during the show. I mean, the people on air. And they made it a big, people were using the F word, without impunity. And they warned me up front, this is going to be all different, right? Well, I think no one knew how different it was going to be. But I said to myself, okay, I want to be in on the joke, but I don't need to do something different than what I do, except because no one's going to make me use the F word on the air, right? Nobody's going to make me smoke, even though, guess what? I lived through the 80s, okay? I'm no choir boy. We had fun in the 80s, right? So it would not be the first time I've been around or participated in somebody getting high. But I'm not going to smoke a joint on the air, right? I'm not going to do any of that. But I was in on the joke, and I knew that the part of the joke was me being the guy, the straight-laced guy, if you will, even though that was not really my personality, but that they could play off of in a fun way. I was totally on board with that. And the first 10 minutes of that show, in my opinion, were terrific because we managed to do some of that, plus call a fight. Now, the show went off the rails at about 20 minutes in, and it never got back on the rails. But, I mean, next to me was Snoop, who I had just interviewed for my own podcast, and was a cool guy. And he and me and Mario Lopez, we had about a 10-minute segment in that beginning of that show, first 15 minutes, that honestly I thought was wildly entertaining and was still actually kind of participating in the boxing. But I went along with the joke, and we made some funny lines and whatever. and he's rolling joints next to me, and I'm getting a contact tie, right? And so I joked about that. I said, "This is the only broadcast I've been on where I get a contact tie." So later on, the show went off the rails, and the funny thing about it, but somehow, for a good portion of that show, I was able to be, kind of, I thought, be a part of it without, and I didn't come away from that show like, I won't say who, one other regular broadcaster who was on it got a little too far afield, in my opinion. And I told him during the show, I said, "You're going to regret what you're doing here." I said, "You can be a part of the fun, but you don't have to go that far." And I wasn't going to do that, but I still was, I still wanted to be, I knew what the show is that I was on, so I was going to be a part of it without, I'm not here to rain on anyone's parade. But so anyway, so when I came home, I'll close out this long story by saying when I got home, my son, who's 24 now, was he about 22 or something, he picked me up at the airport. And all his friends, his young friends, that were watching that Twitter show, right? Because even if they didn't watch boxing, there were all kinds of young people because remember, they had a music show in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And it was, they were driving a young audience, and all his friends couldn't believe it. They said, "Your dad's on there with Snoop Dogg." He's like, okay. But I got back. And so at the beginning of when that show is happening, I'm getting all these texts or tweets and texts from people. "Oh, this is so fun. This is so cool." And of course, by the middle of the show, it was like, "Oh my God, leave, get out of there, save yourself." But I get back and my son picks me up at the airport, and I get in the car, and he said, "Dad, you're never doing that again." And I didn't, although they never really had another show. So that's probably a long answer, but I am a chameleon, and I try to find my way through different situations.
Yeah, well, that's the perfect story and the perfect example to express your versatility as a broadcaster, that's for sure. So, but changing it up just a little bit, Al, in 2012, you were inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, like just the highest possible honor you could receive in the boxing industry. You obviously let us know about your sort of beginnings in the sport and offering to work for ESPN for free. Like, would you ever have imagined all those years ago that you would end up in Canastota? Like, what did that mean to you in that induction ceremony? What a validation of a career, I'm sort of rambling.
When people say what you just asked, and everybody, the prescribed answer, but it is a true one, is no, you would never expect that. And it almost sounds like a cliche when you say it, but no, in a million years. And by the way, the International Boxing Hall of Fame, very generous to people that, that's for the boxers. That's the house for the boxers who are the lifeblood of boxing. They are the men that put their literally their lives on the line, show the courage and the skill to get in that ring. It is all about them. But they're very generous in including people that chronicle the sport, that are part of it. And I think I was about the 6th or 7th commentator that had been inducted in the Hall of Fame at that point. And it's mind-blowing, Zach. It's you can't. Have you ever been to the Canastota induction?
No.
Okay, sometime in your life, and I know it's a long trip, but if you ever have an opportunity, I urge you to do it, because it's amazing. It's in this small little town in Canastota, and they, and the fact that it's in this town that all comes out for it makes it's a charming experience. And unlike the other at least in the United States, other Hall of Fames, the fans have a lot of access to everybody. So you're around all these people, and it's an overwhelming experience. One time, Joe Calzaghe was getting inducted, and I was there, and I go into the bathroom, and Joe was in there just kind of alone and he looked distressed, and I said, "Joe, are you okay?" He said, "I just had to find a place where I could get away. Everybody here is so nice and so wonderful, but like every step you take, there's 25 people getting an autograph and 30 people. It's like almost daunting, right?" But the fact is, it's an amazing experience. And no, I would not have expected it. It was, and And all I could think about during the time was that, I alluded to my father, and he was a big sports fan and a big boxing fan. And I thought to myself, if he was living and could see that happen, I mean, it would have been astonishing for him. So it was very impactful.
Wow, unbelievable. And we're sort of coming up on the end of our time, mate. But
no, take your time. You can do whatever you want to do.
Oh, no worries. I appreciate that.
I'm enjoying talking to you.
Also, I'm having the time of my life. Because I just wanted to touch on too. You mentioned
by the way, can I say this? I'm going to say this right in the middle. You're a very good interviewer, and this is one of the most enjoyable podcasts I've done in a long time.
Oh, thank you. Well, I really appreciate that, mate. Thank you. But,
your podcasts are very good anyway, but I'm just saying, being a part of it it demonstrates it to me.
Oh, that's the best compliment I could ever receive from you. Thank you very much. But, you mentioned earlier about your music career, which if sort of movies and TV are to be believed, the music industry can be just as seedy as the boxing industry. So I guess it fits a little bit. But we have a listener, Robert Rowan, who I know is going to be over at the end of March for the PBC on Amazon show, and he wanted to know if you'll be in Vegas doing a show that weekend.
Well, here's the funny thing. I was going to do a show on March 28th, 2 nights before that, but now I may be doing something else elsewhere. So
okay.
I don't think I'm going to be able to do the show. And I know a bunch of Australian fans had tweeted and written me notes. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. That one's still up in the air.
Okay.
But I wish I could. And that was part of the reason why I was going to do it, because I knew a lot of Australian fans were coming here, and I was hoping to do that. But I'm not sure I'm going to be able to.
Okay, so similar to boxing as well, TBA. It could happen. It could be.
Maybe the next time there's, when Tim or one of the other great Australian fighters fights in Vegas, I will definitely really try and do one of the shows if I can't do it this time.
Excellent. Well, you mentioned the Australian fighters at the end of March, so we may as well get into it to finish off.
Mm-hmm.
Al, we've got a big weekend. We'll just sort of start chronologically. We've got Australia's Liam Wilson fighting Oscar Valdez in just on paper what appears just to be 2 trains on a track going to run into each other a number of times, and we'll see what happens.
Yes.
But is that sort of the opinion you have as well?
I'm sorry, what?
Was that sort of the way you see the fight going as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's of course Liam Wilson and Navarrete was a Fight of the Year candidate. I don't know if it won any of the Fight of the Year awards, but it was right there. And this one almost can't miss being that, right? I mean, barring a cut or some other strange development, which could happen, but it's impossible, right, to imagine this not being wildly exciting. 2 men who both can punch, have very good offenses, and both men have been in exciting fights before. Almost impossible to not think that this is going to be a very exciting fight. And it's as important as it could possibly be for both men. For Valdez, who's older and who has had more, has certainly been around the block more, it's a vital fight, right? Even though his only 2 losses are to great fighters, Shakur Stevenson and Navarrete, he's had two of his last 3 fights, have been losses, and so he wants to really right the ship.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for Liam Wilson, at age 27, he is on the cusp of big things happening. Could have possibly had the championship against Navarrete, but for Chris Flores' fascinating and odd refereeing tactics. We can get into if you'd like.
Yeah, we've spent a lot of podcasts talking about that. So
I'm guessing that has been discussed in Australia.
A couple of times. It's come up.
A few people have mentioned it once or twice.
But yeah, I totally agree, Al. This fight just has fight of the year contender written all over it for as long as it lasts. We'll have to see. But the next day we move over to the PBC on Amazon Prime debut show, which is also a pay-per-view in Australia as it is in America as well. We've got two Australian rivals, funnily enough. Michael Zarafa fighting Erislandy Lara, and of course Tim Tszyu, not defending his title, but fighting Keith Thurman in a non-title fight. What's obviously you're on the ground in America, Al. What's sort of the, I guess, American opinion from the general fan beat? It kind of seems like a bit of more of an international flavor to a pretty steadfast American promotional company to a sort of left of center way to present their first pay-per-view. What's the reaction of the fans been like over there?
You know, it's funny. In the story I wrote, which will be coming out in Ring Magazine, that you alluded to, about a lot of the Australian fighters, and that weekend specifically with three Australian fighters in very important fights, I alluded to the fact that when that fight was announced as the first one that the Premier Boxing people were doing after their hiatus, after Showtime left, and on a new broadcast with a new broadcast partner, some people thought it puzzling, right? That Tim Tszyu was the primary, because let's face it, even though Keith Thurman is a former champion, it's Tim Tszyu who kind of is the driver of that event. And they feel, I guess, that, Thurman being a former champion, even though he's moving up in weight, adds some element to it. But I said in the story that some people thought it was puzzling, but if you think about it, it's not really so puzzling. You're going on a new broadcast entity. You're kind of resetting your promotional company with that. Why not put somebody on there who is relatively new to your company, within the last year or two, couple of years, whose best days are certainly ahead of him, not behind him, and who is building his resume as we speak. And then you add in the fact that he's a very fan-friendly fighter and he has a famous name. So in a lot of ways, what seems maybe puzzling to some isn't puzzling at all. And I said in the story, if there is any puzzling aspect to it, it's Thurman's participation, even though it's not inappropriate for Thurman to step up in weight and try and challenge Tim Tszyu. There's nothing wrong with it. He's a former welterweight champion, but he's coming in off a 2-year layoff, is not a 154-pounder. So, you might have thought there would be somebody else, but it's certainly not Tim Tszyu. I think it's emblematic of kind of how the boxing community, and I'll say this for Americans as well, how they're starting to see Tim Tszyu. He's everybody that starts out, people are skeptical until they are sold on somebody, right? Until they're 100% sure that, this guy's really as good as he seems, as we're kind of being led to believe. Well, he did it the hard way. He fought good fighters. He fought a good, solid group of competitors, and earned his spot, even though, he didn't get to fight Jermell Charlo, who was going to. And Charlo was stripped of his title, and he got the title that way. But then he got it by beating Brian Mendoza, who had just beaten Fundora. So he has fought good opposition. And we have seen before our eyes Tim Tszyu mature and develop as a fighter. Just as all of you saw during those years in Australia. And even looking back, when I look back on video on the fights in Australia that led him to kind of getting on the world stage. I've done, I think, 4 of his last 5 fights or something. I would have done the Tony Harrison one, but I couldn't do that. I had COVID that time. Tim Tszyu has earned what is now respect that is coming his way.
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. You talked about his maturing and his development and his improvement as a fighter. And it's not on the same level, but it's almost Canelo-esque. Like there was a portion of Canelo's career
Yes, I
post
agree.
Mayweather where he was showing so many different wrinkles fight to fight. Tim kind of went through like a little mini version of that a couple of fights ago. My biggest worry is that to a lot of American fans, they may have only seen one or two of his most recent fights, and they just see him or the Terrell Gaucher fight, which was the perfect
Right.
example, but I think they got the game plan a little bit wrong there, but with respect. But they see him as this walk forward, come forward pressure fighter, but he does have so many other strings to his bow. When he uses his feet, his footwork's brilliant. Like the way he beat Jeff Horn, which the Jeff Horn win will never get as the credit it deserves overseas, but that's a different story. That's for us to discuss at the pubs. But like he has so many different strings to his bow, but just recently it's sort of been more of the pressure fighting. So I'm hoping that whether or not he brings different tools out of his toolkit for this particular matchup, I'm not sure, but he certainly does have a lot more arrows in the quiver.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree. And I think, in the story, I joke about the fact that everybody seems to, the code word among American fighters who fight him is his style is basic, in quotes, right? That's what they keep saying, basic. Well, that's a code word for the fact that he's one-dimensional. So I don't think that's true, as you pointed out. And the thing that I look at when I'm looking at him fighting is, number one, he's got a number of offensive weapons, excellent jab, which sometimes is underused, but when he uses it, it's great. Great right hand, good left hook, very good body puncher, and a terrific uppercut. So guess what? If you put all that together, that's a fine offensive arsenal. And I think he is a better defensive fighter than the first video that I saw of him, right, from years ago, which, makes sense. And given all that, he's a boxer puncher. So that phrase, or puncher boxer, we say boxer puncher. He's a puncher boxer. He's not wildly attacking you. He is a pressure fighter, but he's doing it in what I think is kind of a traditional way. And as you say, showing a skill set while he's doing it. So, and here's the thing about Tim Tszyu. At the end of the day, if he gets his power punches in, one of two things is going to happen. He's either going to knock you out and win the fight that way, or he's going to change the tenor of the fight so that you can't beat him. Like the Gaucher fight you mentioned. He didn't knock Gaucher out. And of course, he got a flash knockdown against him in round one. But he changed the fight with his power so that Gaucher was no longer a danger to him, right? And only Gaucher's toughness kept him in the fight.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly an exciting time from an Australian perspective, but also just for all boxing fans. I think there's something to like at the end of March for everyone with those couple of fights. And
I agree.
Yeah, Al, we'll finish it up there, mate. I've taken a little bit more time than I said I would, mate. I apologise, but thank you very much, and we're glad to hear that we'll be hearing you back on the airwaves at some point, at some stage on.
It will be very soon. I'm not done with broadcasting. I enjoy doing it, and so I will be back on the air and doing all of these other things as well.
Excellent. Well, that's excellent news. And also for people listening, I'll put the Ring article that Al wrote about the current heavyweight era. I'll put that in the description of this episode so people can just click on that if they haven't read it yet. And yeah, Al, I'll also put your social media handles in there as well. So if people aren't following you, which I'm sure if they're listening to this podcast, they are following you already. But if they're not, they can jump on and follow along with one of the best.
Then get me on the X or Twitter or whatever it is, at Al Bernstein, so they can find me there if they want and interact with me. I try to interact with folks as much as I can.
Absolutely. And Al, just one more thing before we finish up too. I think it's important for people to know that it's easy to be a nice guy and a gentleman when the red light's on and you're being recorded. But I think it's important that people know how much of a gentleman you were to deal with going back and forth on the emails. when we were trying to set up this podcast, and I've done a fair few with a lot of people from overseas, and everyone's been fantastic, but no one's cared more about the time difference than you have, which I really appreciate as well. It just speaks to your character and generosity. So, Al, this has been an absolute thrill. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for your time. Just stay on the line because this takes about a minute or two to upload once we're done. But thank you so much, and best of luck moving forward.
Well, I've enjoyed this immensely, and I appreciate you inviting me. Happy to come back again if there's stuff in the future that you want to talk about, specific fights or whatever. One of my greatest regrets, okay, I wrote in the article that I just did for Ring about all the Australian things, that I am, like many Americans, beguiled by all things Australian. And one of my greatest regrets is that I've never visited Australia. Still on my, I know, isn't that terrible? Still on my bucket list. I thought I was going to be doing, I did 2 of the Olympics for NBC in 96 and 2000. Then I didn't get to do the Olympics in Australia. But I've come close a couple of times, but never. And I am a horseman. I also ride, and on my bucket list is coming to Australia to do a trail ride or to ride in your country. So that's my big goal. And now this will either send people shuddering away from this interview and they'll never want to hear from me again in Australia, or some people will think it's charming. My favorite TV show of all time is McLeod's Daughters.
Oh, you have just made my grandmother's year. That's her favorite show too.
Of course, it's your grandmother, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah.
But yeah, it's like one of my favorite things. So when I say that to people, some of them cringe and say, "You're kidding me," right? But my thing is, I love horses. I love all that. Plus, I love the whole thing. So it's one of my all-time favorites. So people can chew on that and say, okay, I don't know, this guy's either a nut or he's whatever. But
no, that's fantastic. Oh,
anyway, but yeah, I appreciate it. And this has been a lot of fun doing this with you, and very much enjoyed it. And anytime you want, just reach out, and we'll do it again.
I would be silly not to, Al, but I'll make sure I leave a bit of space in between annoying you again. But at some stage down the track in the future, that would be amazing. So, wow, McLeod's Daughter's got a shout out. I didn't think that was going to happen.
Go figure, right? Yeah, of all the crazy things, right? I don't know. I got addicted to it. I was in England when I happened to put on the TV, and it was running on ITV or something like that. And I looked at the show and I said, man, this is good. And then I couldn't find it in America. For a long time, it was like impossible to get. This was years ago, right? Because it was on, 15 years ago or something like that. Something. And I did everything to search it. And then, I bought every DVD back then. I bought everyone, and I'm like, okay, I'm binging, and I watched it on on TV and everything. So it was funny, but
wow,
yeah. So, and I love so many others. I mean, I could name 10 other series, but so it was funny. But whenever I talk to folks in Australia, they're like, really? That's amazing. So,
that's fantastic.
So at least I gave you one surprise in this interview, huh?
Yeah, I thought the Triller story would be the biggest surprise, but it was McLeod's Daughters.
Yeah, you would think that one would be the craziest, but anyway, I very much enjoyed doing this, and you do a great job with this show. So, and I hope that maybe somewhere down the road you'll be in the United States covering one of these fights, or I may get to Australia and we'll get a chance to hang out.
Absolutely. That would be unbelievable, Al. But once again, just stay on the line. We'll just have a quick little chat while this is done. But thank you again, mate. Unbelievable. All right, guys. Well, there we have it. My chat with the legendary Al Bernstein. I don't know if you guys enjoyed that, and I don't know if you could tell if I did, but wow, I had a ball. I had an absolute ball. When I said during the chat that I didn't sleep last night because I was so excited / nervous, that's absolutely true. I couldn't believe it was happening, and I also mentioned in the chat too, and I wanted to tell Al that he was genuinely such a pleasure to deal with organising this. When you're from the opposite side of the world, there is a lot of logistical things and time differences and stuff like that. But all I could say is, which I tried to say, and I hope I projected it properly to Al. My point, which was supposed to be, it's easy to be nice and generous and a gentleman, when you're being recorded and the lights are on and those type of things. And that's fantastic when people are. And but it's a lot harder and a lot more character revealing when, in private, behind closed doors when no one's looking. That sort of reveals what type of person you are. And all I can say with my interactions with Al, either via email or before and after we started recording, an absolute thorough gentleman, curious, inquisitive, thoughtful, just all the things that we think Al was and how highly we think of him and how highly he's regarded in the boxing world. All I can say is from my personal, albeit very small, interactions with him, he was all those things and more. Just a genuinely gentleman, a really, really, really nice guy. I'm sort of rambling, but that's what happens when, you're kind of blown away. I mean, look, to pull the, have a peek behind the curtain, I should say. We recorded the chat earlier this morning on the day of recording, so we did it at 6:30 a.m. Melbourne time, local time for me, which was also later in the morning yesterday for Al. And I had to go straight to work afterwards, and now I've come home, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 hours later to record the intro and outros. And you know what? I was actually going to a job I was dreading, not like a really good job or anything like that, a real dirty, annoying, horrible job. It didn't even faze me today. Like, I was kind of on cloud nine. I'm doing this job that ordinarily I would be so, I'd be a bit grumpy and stuff. Like, this job sucks. That this wasn't a good day at work type thing. But today it was water off a duck's back. I got to, chat to Al Bernstein for over an hour. If everyone could start their day like that, I reckon you would all have a great day too. So very, very big thank you to Al Bernstein, of course, for his time. And also wanted to do a massive, massive shout out to Anthony Cox, the Aussie boxing scribe, the ABS frequent guest on this podcast and future frequent guest as well. Massive shout out to him, because without Anthony, this podcast would not have happened. So massive genuine thank you to Anthony, because I just had absolutely so much fun, and it wouldn't have been possible without him. So as mentioned in the pod, guys, I've put the link to the Ring article that Al Bernstein has written, basically summing up this final stage of this current heavyweight era, obviously ending in the undisputed fight with Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk, hopefully, which is to go ahead in May now on the rescheduled date. And from an Aussie point of view, we've got the rescheduled Diopataya Maris Breedis rematch. Can't wait for that as well. So the link to that article is in the description of this episode, as is Al's Twitter or /X handle. If you guys aren't following Al, I think you definitely should be. It's a great place where Al just puts his thoughts out just generally on the boxing world, all different promotions, fights that pique his interest. You get a really good insight into what Al's thinking about the sport sort of more globally and a little bit more wider than in terms of who he might be broadcasting or working for, which is... And also great to hear that Al is got broadcasting in his somewhat seemingly immediate future, which is fantastic. Obviously, we don't know the details, but I believe any sort of broadcast network or promoter or whatever it may be would be foolish not to at least talk to Al and try and get his services, because he's so absolutely brilliant at what he does. So, guys, can you believe that? I got to chat to Al Bernstein this morning. How good is that? Oh man, that's that's one I'm going to remember for a long time. So anyway, I'll stop rambling. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I certainly did. And thanks again to Mr. Al Bernstein and of course Mr. Anthony Cox as well for being the integral part that made this whole thing possible. Thank you to both of those gentlemen. Guys, now last night was the first No Limit on Fox fight card, one of the free ones, which was supposed to be Reynold Quinlan and Bilal Akaway. If you're listening to this now, obviously you already know the huge weigh-in debacle. God, I don't even know where to begin. So Bilal, and fair enough to him for not taking the fight, didn't end up fighting. Reynold Quinlan fought a heavyweight on a day's notice. Credit to the heavyweight for taking the fight on such short notice. I believe he was interstate too. Look, anyway, the point of me mentioning it is last night I had two choices. I could either watch this card, which with all due respect to the fighters on the card, you know, good on them. Should it have been a TV product? Look, we've had those discussions on previous podcasts. I don't want to go over old ground, but I'm just telling you my experience and what I did. I could have watched the card, but what I decided to do was really try to sit down and structure some good notes for the podcast with Bernstein. So obviously I was clearly looking much more forward to having a chat to Al a couple of hours later than watching the card last night. I did have it on in the background. I saw I saw most of the highlights, you know, a little bit of things here and there. But look, with all due respect to the fighters, I obviously had something else that I was looking forward to more, and I thought deserved my attention more so than that fight card. But I'm sure as the quote-unquote March mayhem continues to unfold, we will have some future thoughts on the pod. So, yeah, we'll see what happens next week. But, guys, this is going to be... Look, I don't like revealing the plans because, yeah, things can change and all that sort of stuff, but... if everything stays on track, March could be one of our busiest months on the pod that we've ever had. I'll say that. I've had some verbal and text/email style confirmations on a few things. Yeah, I'm just going to hint at March could be pretty good. March could be amazing, actually. I'm actually fully fired up so March could be absolutely fantastic. But again, we'll see what happens. Don't hold me to it. Things can change, but I am optimistic it's going to be good. So, guys, the TV schedule, you know it. I don't need to do it. If you want to get in contact with me, you can email the pod at tuscpod@gmail.com. That's tuspod@gmail.com. If you want to throw a tweet at me, you can do that at delivery_man2. Also got the Insta page. You guys know the deal. Not groundbreaking content. Follow if you want or not. No hard feelings either way. But, guys... there we had it, episode 64. This was a true highlight of doing the pod for me. Yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did because, yeah, that was great. This is why I do the pod, to be honest. Like, I love every conversation I have, but when every now and then when you get to do one like this and speak to such a legend like Bernstein, yeah, it's truly really is a real treat, and I loved it. I'm rambling. It's what I do when I just get pumped up about stuff. I ramble. So anyway, guys, I'll cut it off there. Hope you all enjoyed it. Enjoy the fights, and I'll chat to you soon.
Well, let's travel, man up the chain. Living like there's no tomorrow, then tomorrow came. Going all out. I was living like there's no tomorrow, then tomorrow came. I got the wake-up call, laughing through the window frame.